It began with a lantern still burning by the tracks, its flame trembling against the wind, circling light over the empty freight yard where her bicycle stood waiting, gloves folded neatly on the handlebars as if she meant to come back. But Helen Cross did not come back. She never would. By sunrise, the rails were silent, the dogs restless, and the morning train passed without stopping, its whistle carrying her name across the valley. People said she slipped, that the cold took her, but even as they spoke, no one believed it, because Helen wasn't careless. She was the kind of woman who left everything in its place, every wire labeled, every shift recorded in blue ink and steady hands. Deputy Samuel Vance found the lantern still burning and a single set of boot prints leading to the edge of the tracks, then stopping, not turning, not dragging, just stopping. For 50 years, the town called it an accident, until a freight car bound for scrap was opened in 2012, and inside lay her silver locket, still shining faintly under the rust. The fingerprint on it did not belong to Helen. Stay with me, because this story doesn't rest easy. If you believe some truths never stay buried, hit subscribe, leave a comment on what you think happened to Helen, and keep listening, because this one is different. This one is the girl who waited by the tracks. The wind moved low through Silver Junction that night, dragging cold dust along the empty streets until it found its way to the freight yard. The town was half asleep, a few lights still burning in the diner, and the sound of a distant radio carrying a song that no one remembered the name of. Inside the small telegraph office, Helen Cross leaned over her typewriter, the rhythmic clicks mixing with the hum of the signal line that never truly went quiet. She had been there since sunset, sending schedules, logging reports, and listening to the rails like they were alive. Her shift was supposed to end just before midnight. She poured herself one last cup of coffee, the liquid trembling slightly as the ground shook with a passing freight. She liked the trains, the way they announced themselves before you ever saw them, the way they cut through the silence of the plains like something certain. The night was calm, nothing unusual. One engineer waved as he passed the depot, and Helen smiled back, though he never saw it. At 11:47 she wrote her final transmission for the night, a short message about a delay near Laramie. Then she placed her headphones down, stood to stretch, and turned off the overhead lamp. The lantern by the door gave just enough light to see the frost forming on the windows. She buttoned her coat, reached for her gloves, and stepped outside into the wind that always carried the scent of iron and smoke. Deputy Samuel Vance was parked a few blocks away, keeping watch over the station district. He saw her bicycle light flicker once as she pedaled toward the siding. Later, he would remember how deliberate her movements looked, how she paused near the telegraph pole as if she heard something. He thought she was just adjusting her coat, maybe waiting for the next train to clear before crossing. He did not know that was the last time anyone would see her alive. The next morning, the depot manager arrived at 6. The office was unlocked, the lantern still burning low, her stool pushed back as though she had stood up mid-sentence. Her thermos was full, her coat missing, and on the table lay her punch card marked in, but never out. When the sheriff arrived, he said she must have wandered off, maybe slipped near the tracks. But Vance looked at the ground and saw no drag marks, no signs of a fall. Only one clean set of prints leading from the door to the edge of the siding. Then nothing. They searched the yard until the sun rose high enough to turn the frost into mist. The dogs barked at the dark beneath the cars. The men shouted her name, and the trains kept moving as if none of it mattered. By noon, the story had already begun to spread through town. People gathered at the diner whispering that she was too careful, too neat, to simply vanish. They said the wind out there could play tricks, that sometimes you heard your own name carried back at you, and if you followed it, you might never return. Vance stayed until dark. He checked the telegraph lines, her desk, the trail that ran behind the yard. He found her bicycle leaning against the pole where the prints ended. The chain still held a trace of oil, the frame still warm from her hands. In the small basket hung a folded note she had written to herself that morning. It said, "Remember to send Mother's letter, nothing else." When the sheriff finally called off the search for the night, Vance stayed behind. He stood by the tracks, the lantern light swaying against his boots, and listened. For a long time he thought he could hear something just beyond the yard, a faint metallic rhythm that did not belong to the trains. Later he would write in his notebook, sound like breathing near the rails, then gone. That was the first entry in a file that would remain open for almost 50 years. Morning came slow over Silver Junction, the kind of pale gray dawn that makes everything look guilty. The station lights flickered off one by one while men gathered near the tracks, hands in their coat pockets, steam rising from their breath. The sheriff gave quiet orders, his voice steady but thin. They started from the depot and moved outward in long rows, boots crunching frost, calling her name into the wind. Helen Cross. The words drifted over the empty valley and came back softer, like the land itself did not want to answer. Deputy Samuel Vance walked near the front, notebook in hand, eyes fixed on the ground. He was not looking for signs of life anymore. He was looking for sense. He found the trail easily enough, those same single boot prints pressed into frozen dirt leading away from the telegraph office toward the siding. He measured the stride, too even for panic, too straight for confusion. At the end of the trail, the prints simply stopped. The sheriff told him to check the riverbank that ran beyond the yard, so he did. The water was low that winter, dark ribbons sliding between sheets of ice. No footprints there either. Just reeds and a lost scarf half buried in frost. Blue wool, not hers. Vance noted it anyway. He wrote everything down. A cigarette butt, a torn newspaper page, a strand of hair caught on the door hinge. He had learned early that small towns like Silver Junction like to cover their secrets with details until no one could tell what mattered anymore. By midday, half the town had joined in. Women from the church brought coffee in tin pots. Men from the mill carried ropes and lanterns. The station master opened every freight car along the siding, climbing through the cold steel hollows that smelled of dust and grain. Nothing. No coat, no blood, no sign that anyone had struggled. Just the echo of boots and breath bouncing off the walls. One man mentioned seeing Deputy Russell Thorne near the depot late that night, parked by the water tower. He said he thought Thorne was watching the yard, maybe helping with security. The sheriff nodded and said Thorne had already given his statement. He said it was routine. Vance wrote the name anyway, drawing a small mark beside it. He had worked with Thorne for 3 years, knew his confidence, the easy grin that people trusted without thinking. He also knew how quickly that grin could fade when someone challenged him. As the sun began to sink, the temperature dropped fast. Frost crawled over the rail lines, turning them into thin mirrors that caught the dying light. The search party gathered near the telegraph office again, empty-handed. The sheriff announced they would resume in the morning. Some men prayed aloud, others cursed the cold. The town's preacher stood by the door and said, "The Lord takes those who are ready," but even he sounded unsure. Vance lingered after the others left. He walked back to the bicycle, traced a gloved finger over the handlebars, and stared at the still-burning lantern. He tried to imagine Helen stepping into the dark, hearing a noise behind her, maybe turning, maybe trusting the wrong voice. The thought made his chest tighten. Before leaving, he followed a faint tire track that curved behind the depot toward the maintenance shed. It was half erased by frost, but distinct enough to see it had stopped there, then reversed out again. He bent closer, brushed away dirt, and saw another set of prints beside it, larger, heavier, the kind that belonged to a man wearing work boots. He compared them to his own, and then to the ones near the telegraph pole. They were the same. When he brought it up to the sheriff, the answer was short. Could be anyone. Could be Thorne himself doing his rounds. Vance nodded, but he wrote another line in his notebook that night before sleep. Same boots near the pole and behind the shed. Thorne's patrol car not logged in radio sheet. The snow came heavy that evening, washing away every trace by morning. The town exhaled as if it had permission to stop caring, but Vance did not. He kept the notebook in his pocket even when the case went cold, because something in the silence of those tracks told him the truth had not left. It was only waiting. 2 days after Helen Cross disappeared, the search turned into an investigation. The sheriff ordered interviews with everyone who had been near the freight yard that night. The small office of the Silver Junction courthouse filled with the smell of coffee and wet coats as townspeople came in one by one, voices low, eyes tired. Most had nothing to offer beyond worry and repetition. They had seen her the day before. She had smiled. She had mentioned the cold. No one had noticed anything strange. Deputy Samuel Vance sat beside the sheriff, writing down every word. He listened for what people did not say, for the spaces between their sentences. The telegraph operator from the next shift said she had arrived early that morning to find Helen's work still on the desk. The signal log showed no interruptions, no distress code, no sudden drop in line. The only irregularity was a short static burst recorded at 11:54, about 7 minutes after her last message. The sheriff said it was likely the storm. Vance made a note anyway. By the afternoon, one name kept returning in quiet voices: Russell Thorne. Several people had seen his patrol car near the yard that night. One claimed he was parked behind the maintenance shed, headlights off. Another said he was in the diner at 11:30, talking to Helen about her bicycle chain. Thorne denied it. He said he was on highway patrol until midnight, checking the bridge crossing. His tone was smooth, practiced. He smiled as he spoke, the kind of smile meant to end questions. Vance watched him carefully. They had worked together for years, driven the same roads, shared long hours in silence. He knew Thorne's confidence. He also knew the arrogance behind it. When the sheriff asked if anyone could confirm his location, Thorne shrugged. "You know how it is out there," he said. "Radio's been patchy since the storm." He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, and met Vance's eyes with the faintest flicker of something unreadable. After the interview, Vance walked outside to clear his head. The wind cut sharp through the alley, carrying the smell of smoke from the rail yard. He lit a cigarette, hands shaking slightly. He could feel it, the first thin thread of a lie. He replayed Thorne's words in his mind, the way he had said the storm, as if he had been there to feel it. That evening, Vance returned to the station and reviewed the patrol logs. Thorne's sheet was blank for the last 2 hours of his shift. No radio calls, no check-ins, just silence. He asked the dispatcher, an older woman named Martha Greeley, if she remembered hearing from Thorne that night. She frowned, thought for a while, then said, "No. I remember calling him around midnight. No answer. I figured he was out by the bridge." She hesitated before adding, Helen used to bring him coffee sometimes when he worked nights. Maybe she stopped by. It was a simple sentence, but it sank into Vance like a stone. He returned to the evidence table and opened Helen's bag, found the thermos still full and sealed tight. Whatever she had planned that night, it had been interrupted before she left her post. The sheriff told him to stop overthinking. "You can't build a case on suspicion," he said. "Thorne's one of our own. We keep this quiet until we have something solid." Vance nodded, but kept writing in his notebook. Thorne unaccounted between 11:30 and 12. Possible connection. No confirmation. Later that night, he drove back to the tracks alone. The lantern was gone now, replaced by a weak security light that buzzed overhead. He walked the same path she had taken, step for step, until he reached the point where the prints ended. He stood there for a long time, the cold cutting into his lungs. Then he whispered her name once, as if the wind might remember it. Somewhere beyond the siding, a piece of loose metal clanged against the steel, repeating in uneven rhythm. He followed the sound, but found only empty air and darkness stretching into the canyon. Still, he wrote it down when he got home. Sound like knocking under rail car. Check maintenance shed. That note would later become evidence exhibit number 3, the first trace of a story no one wanted to believe. The maintenance shed stood at the far edge of the freight yard, a narrow building made of corrugated metal that moaned whenever the wind touched it. Most nights it was empty except for spare tools, barrels of oil, and the thick smell of rust that clung to everything inside. On the third day of the search, Deputy Samuel Vance brought a lantern and the master key from the sheriff's desk. He unlocked the door just after dusk, when the cold had started to settle again. The hinges cried out as he pushed it open. Dust spiraled through the beam of his light. Rows of broken shovels leaned against the wall, beside a few paint cans and a rack of uniforms no one had worn in years. He took slow steps, sweeping the light across the floor. In one corner, he saw a set of tire marks that did not belong to any of the maintenance trucks. They were narrow, almost the width of a deputy's patrol car. He crouched and touched the oil stain beside them. It was fresh. The scent was sharp and recent. Someone had been there within the past 2 days. He looked around again and noticed something else. A dent in the wall at shoulder height, the metal folded inward as if struck hard by a fist or the butt of a gun. He wrote it all down in his notebook. Outside, the rails groaned beneath a passing train. The sound made the shed tremble. For a moment, Vance imagined Helen Cross inside this same space, maybe arguing with someone, maybe afraid. He turned toward the door and froze. There was a small silver object glinting beneath a workbench. A button. He picked it up carefully and turned it in his hand. It was stamped with the county insignia. A deputy's uniform button. He took it to the sheriff that night. The man barely looked up from his desk when Vance placed it down. "Could have fallen from anyone," the sheriff said. Vance replied quietly, "It is the same make as ours." "Then it proves nothing," the sheriff said, closing his file. "You are chasing ghosts, Sam. The girl is gone. Maybe she left town. Maybe she fell. We do not hang a man on coincidence." Vance left the office without another word. He knew the sheriff was under pressure. A missing telegraph operator was bad enough, but accusing one of their own deputies would tear the department apart. Still, the facts stayed with him. The missing hours, the footprints that matched, the oil under the shed, and now the button. That night, he drove past Russell Thorne's house on the edge of town. The windows were dark except for the faint glow of a television in the front room. Thorne's patrol car sat in the driveway, still streaked with mud. Vance parked a block away and waited. After 10 minutes, Thorne came outside with a beer in his hand. He looked up and down the street before sitting on the porch steps. He looked calm, almost too calm. Vance wrote the details in his book later that night. Patrol car uncleaned. Possible oil leak. No visible anxiety. He wanted to believe he was wrong. He wanted to believe the town's peacekeeper could not be capable of harm. But he could not forget the way Thorne's voice had sounded in the courthouse. Measured, rehearsed, a little too certain. The next morning, Vance returned to the shed with daylight on his side. He searched the ground again, pulling away scraps of wood and metal. Near the corner where the button had fallen, he found something else. A small indentation in the dirt shaped like a heel pressed deep. He set his own boot beside it. The size matched exactly with the prints he had measured by the telegraph pole. He took a photograph with the department camera and filed it under miscellaneous. The sheriff refused to sign it as evidence. The paper sat on Vance's desk for a week before it disappeared from the drawer completely. That night, he wrote one final line before locking his notebook away. The shed tells the truth. Someone erased it. Outside, under the frozen Wyoming sky, the rails sang in the distance. The sound rose once, sharp and metallic, then vanished into the wind like a warning no one wanted to hear. Snow came early that year, falling thick over the valley until the whole town seemed buried under its own quiet. The search for Helen Cross had ended, the posters curling on the windows of the diner, the church, and the post office. The sheriff said there was nothing more to find. He told the newspaper that the case was closed pending new evidence. But in Silver Junction, everyone understood what that meant. The story was already fading. Deputy Samuel Vance did not let it fade. He drove the same road to the station every day, even when he was off duty, watching the yard from his window as if the air itself might confess. He wrote notes no one asked for, mapped out every conversation he had heard, every rumor whispered in passing. He visited the maintenance shed once more and found it swept clean, the floor spotless, the oil stains gone. The lock had been changed. In town, people began to speak of Helen in the past tense. At the diner, they said she had been kind. At the church, they said she had been pure. At the bar, they said she should not have worked nights. Each word built a wall between what she was and what they wanted to believe. Vance heard it all and wrote in his notebook, "They mourn the version that feels safest." He visited Russell Thorne again the following week, pretending it was routine. Thorne greeted him with the same easy grin. He offered coffee, asked about the weather, asked if there had been any new leads. His tone was light, almost playful. Vance looked around the room and noticed that Thorne's boots by the door were freshly polished. The soles had been replaced. He wrote that down later, too. They sat for a while in small talk until Vance said quietly, "You were near the yard that night." Thorne looked up, his smile unchanged. "I was on patrol," he said. "You know that. You did not check in on the radio. Signal was out. You did not file your report." Thorne leaned back, eyes narrowing. "What exactly are you asking me, Sam?" Vance said nothing. He only watched him, the silence stretching until Thorne finally stood. "I would be careful," he said, his voice low now. "You start chasing ghosts, people might think you are one of them." Vance left soon after, the weight of that sentence pressing against his chest. He walked to his car and sat there in the dark, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. Behind him, the light from Thorne's house flickered once and went out. That night he could not sleep. He went through his notes again, aligning the times, the statements, the inconsistencies. He noticed something he had missed before. The static on the telegraph line recorded at 11:54, the same moment Thorne's patrol car had gone off the radio grid. He circled it in red ink, then closed the book. A week later, the sheriff called him into the office. "You are letting this case eat you," he said. "Thorne is clean. We are moving on." He took the notebook from Vance's hands and locked it in a drawer. "You need rest. Let it go." Vance nodded, but when he left the room, he went straight to the evidence cabinet. The button was gone. The photograph of the boot print was missing. Only Helen's punch card remained, marked in but never out. That evening, snow began to fall again, soft and heavy, swallowing the sound of the rails. Vance stood by the window of his small apartment, the light from the street lamp painting the room in pale gold. He opened a new notebook and wrote a single line. "If they are done listening, the truth will have to wait." He closed the cover, placed it on the windowsill, and looked toward the freight yard where the signal light blinked red against the snow. For a moment, he thought he saw someone standing near the telegraph pole, motionless, watching the trains pass. But when he blinked, the figure was gone, and only the storm remained. By spring, the snow melted into mud, and the river broke free again, running dark and fast beneath the bridge that cut through the valley. The town came back to life in small, reluctant ways. Children played outside, shop windows reopened, and the church bell rang each Sunday as if it could drown the memory of winter. But for Samuel Vance, nothing had changed. The silence around Helen Cross had only thickened. He had been reassigned to highway patrol far from the freight yard, but most nights he still drove past it before heading home. The station looked different now. The broken fence had been repaired, the high sheet padlocked and painted a dull gray. There were new deputies, too, young and eager, who spoke of the case like it was an old rumor. When they saw him lingering near the tracks, they stopped talking. In April, a letter arrived at his apartment. No name, no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper torn from a notebook. On it was written 3 words in uneven pencil strokes. "Check the bridge." Vance turned it over. Nothing else. He looked at the handwriting for a long time before realizing what felt wrong. It was shaky but familiar. The way the letters looped reminded him of the station logs Helen used to fill out, careful and neat even when rushed. He knew it could not be hers, but something in it made his pulse quicken. That night he drove to the bridge. The air smelled of rain and steel. He parked by the embankment and walked along the edge where the gravel met the tracks. The lantern light flickered across the water. He saw a small pile of debris caught in the current, sticks, rope, a torn scrap of fabric. He climbed down, boots slipping in the mud, and reached for it. The cloth was pale blue, stiff with dirt. A corner of a uniform sleeve. He froze. The county insignia was faint but visible. A deputy's patch, the same kind worn by Russell Thorne. He took it to the sheriff the next morning. The man sighed, rubbing his temples. "We have been through this," he said. "You see patterns because you want to. That bridge has caught pieces of half the town's laundry by now." Vance said quietly, "Then test it. Prove me wrong." The sheriff looked up, tired. "The state will not waste money on a dead case." Vance left the office without a word. He drove straight to the river again, to the same spot beneath the bridge. He knelt by the bank, tracing the water line with his fingers, feeling how cold it still was. In the dirt, he found a cigarette butt half buried. He picked it up with his handkerchief. The brand was the same one Thorne always smoked. He put it in a jar and hid it in his desk at home. No one would log it, but he could not throw it away either. He began building his own file, one piece at a time, separate from the department, the bridge, the button, the boot print, the silence. A week later, Thorne stopped him outside the station. "You still driving out there?" he asked, smiling without warmth. "Sometimes," Vance said. Thorne nodded. "You should stop. There's nothing left to find." Vance met his eyes. "Then why does it still bother you?" For a second, neither man moved. Then Thorne smiled again, slow and careful. "Because I do not like being watched." That night, Vance dreamed of the river. He saw Helen standing in the current, her hands cupped as if she were holding something fragile. When he called her name, she lifted her palms and the water spilled through them, carrying a silver chain that glinted before vanishing into the dark. He woke before dawn, his heart pounding. He sat up, turned on the lamp, and wrote in his notebook. Bridge connects everything. Water hides truth, but returns it when it is ready. Outside, the first train of the day passed through the valley, its whistle long and hollow, echoing like a memory too heavy to die. Summer came to Silver Junction, dry and relentless, burning the frost out of the soil but leaving something colder beneath it. The trains moved slower now, their schedules cut back as the mining company lost business. The town was shrinking, piece by piece, like a photograph left in the sun. Samuel Vance had started sleeping less. He spent his nights sorting through old reports, reading them aloud as if the words might rearrange themselves into truth. The sheriff avoided him. Russell Thorne greeted him with polite silence, the kind reserved for men already considered ghosts. Then, one afternoon in June, Thorne handed in his resignation. He said he was taking a position up north, somewhere near Billings. "New start," he said. "New badge, new town." He offered Vance his hand, smiling that same easy smile that always felt too deliberate. Vance shook it, noting how cold the man's skin was even in the heat. When Thorne left, the department felt lighter. People said it was time. They said he had earned the move. But for Vance, the timing was wrong. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Leaving means fear. Guilt moves faster than the truth." A week later, Vance drove out to the bridge again. The river had thinned, the current slower now. He found the spot where the cloth had been caught before, but the debris was gone. What remained was a smooth patch of mud and a set of tire tracks leading down from the main road. He measured them by eye, patrol car width. He went back to the office to report it, but the sheriff refused to sign another statement. "You cannot chase a man who has not been charged," he said. "We are done with this." The drawer where the case file had been kept was empty. The evidence logbook was gone too. That night, Vance stopped by the diner. The waitress poured his coffee without asking. She looked at him for a long time and said, "You know, Helen used to sit there too. Always ordered tea, never coffee. Said she liked quiet drinks." It was such a small thing, but it made him feel her presence again. A ghost, polite and patient, waiting for someone to notice. He drove home after midnight. The sky was clear, the stars sharp. As he passed the freight yard, he saw a light in the shed, a dim yellow glow through the slats. He pulled over and approached quietly, his hand near his holster. When he opened the door, the light went out. Only the smell of oil and metal remained. On the floor near the wall lay a single object, a train schedule card. water-damaged and creased. The name Helen Cross was still faintly visible in the corner. He picked it up and turned it over. The back was smudged with what looked like a fingerprint in dried rust. He put it in his pocket and stepped outside, listening. The yard was empty. The rails shone in the moonlight, stretching endlessly into the dark. The next morning, he brought the card to the sheriff. The man did not even look at it. "You are done, Sam," he said. "Take some leave. You have earned it." Vance did not answer. He simply walked out, the card still in his pocket, his badge feeling heavier than it ever had before. He drove north, following the same road that Thorne had taken the week before, the highway running straight through the empty fields. He stopped once near the county line to check his mirror. A set of headlights appeared far behind him, keeping the same distance no matter how fast he drove. When he finally turned off toward the hills, the lights vanished. He waited 5 minutes, then 10. The road stayed empty. That night, he rented a room at a small roadside motel. He placed his gun on the table and his notebook beside it. On the last page, he wrote one line: "Thorne runs. River follows." He turned off the lamp and listened to the quiet hum of the highway, knowing deep down that the truth was not done with either of them yet. The letter arrived in early autumn, wrapped in a plain brown envelope with no return address. The handwriting was rough, each letter pressed too hard into the paper. Samuel Vance had been back on duty for a few months, trying to convince himself he was finished with the case. When he saw the letter on his desk, his hands began to tremble. Inside was a single sheet torn from a lined notebook. The words were short, uneven. "I did not mean to. It was supposed to be a talk. I lost myself. The shed. I am sorry." It was signed R.T. He sat very still for a long time. He could hear the clock on the wall, the slow ticking like footsteps approaching from far away. Then he folded the paper and locked it in his drawer. For the first time in years, he felt the shape of something solid beneath all the guessing. That evening, he drove to the sheriff's house. The old man answered the door in his slippers, tired and cautious. Vance handed him the letter. "You need to see this," he said. The sheriff read it once, then again, his lips tightening. "You cannot prove who wrote this," he said finally. Vance looked him straight in the eye. "You and I both know who did." The sheriff sighed, lowering his voice. "Thorne is gone. We keep the peace here, not start another war." Vance stepped back, shaking his head. "There is no peace built on lies." He left without waiting for an answer. The night air was cold, the sky clear enough to see the faint trail of the freight line stretching west. He drove until the town lights disappeared, then pulled over by the bridge. The river below moved slow and thick, like something burdened by memory. He read the letter again under the beam of his flashlight. The words were clumsy, desperate. He could almost hear Thorne's voice behind them, the guilt bleeding through every shaky line. The next morning, he contacted the State Bureau in Cheyenne. He sent copies of every note he had kept, every photograph, every record that had survived the years of silence. He enclosed the letter at the top, marked confidential. 2 weeks passed before he received a call. The voice on the other end said the handwriting matched an old statement from Thorne's employment file. It was a near-perfect match. By then, Thorne was living 3 states away. The Bureau contacted the local police there, asking for cooperation. They found him working at a security post outside an old mining facility. The arrest was quiet. No resistance, no drama. Just a tired man in a wrinkled uniform looking like someone who had been waiting for the knock. When they brought him back to Wyoming, Vance was there. The interrogation room smelled of dust and coffee. Thorne looked smaller than Vance remembered. His hair was gray, his hands unsteady. He did not ask why he was there. He only said, "You never stopped, did you?" Vance answered softly, "You never gave me a reason to." For a long moment they sat in silence. Then Thorne began to speak. His voice was flat, but every word carried weight. "She laughed," he said. "Not mean, not cruel, just laughed. Said I should not wait for her. Said she had other plans. I tried to stop her from leaving. I did not mean to hurt her. She fell against the door, hit her head. There was blood. I froze. I did not know what to do." He looked up, his eyes wet. "I drove her to the shed. Thought I could think. Thought maybe I could hide the mess. The trains were passing, so loud I could not even hear my own voice. I told myself I would come back, but I never did." Vance closed his notebook. There was nothing left to write. When Thorne finished, he put his head in his hands. "You should not have looked," he said. "You could have lived without knowing." Vance stood slowly. "No," he said. "No one lives with silence that long." As he walked out of the room, he heard Thorne whisper something behind him, so quiet he almost missed it. She never screamed. That sentence would echo in his mind for years to come. The confession reached the papers before the trial ever began. Silver Junction woke to headlines printed in thick black ink, the words "Deputy confesses in 1965. Disappearance spread across the front page of the county journal. For a day the town stopped pretending it had forgotten. Old men sat in the diner, reading in silence. The church bell rang that evening without being asked. And, for the first time since that winter night, people said her name out loud. Helen Cross. The courthouse filled fast on the morning of the hearing. The air smelled of old wood and coffee. Vance sat near the back, hat in his hands, watching Russell Thorne shuffle into the room in shackles. The man looked thinner now, his face gray, eyes hollow. When the judge asked for his plea, his voice cracked once before he said, "Guilty." No one moved. The sound hung there like a stone in water. The prosecutor read his statement, the one Vance had already memorized line by line. It described the fight, the panic, the mistake that became something worse. The body placed near the shed, then moved before dawn, hidden by the riverbank. It was not an accident, not really. It was fear turned into silence. When the hearing ended, Thorne turned to look for him. Their eyes met only once. There was no hatred there, no anger, just a strange relief, as if confession had been the only way left to breathe. The guards led him out, and the door closed behind them with a heavy sound that echoed through the hall long after everyone else had gone. That night, Vance drove out to the river alone. The sun was setting, the water catching fire where it bent under the bridge. He walked down to the bank, boots sinking in the mud. Somewhere beneath that current lay the fragments of every lie that had held the town together. The silver locket had been found there months before, carried by time until it surfaced in a freight car that should never have been opened. The river had kept its promise. He knelt beside the water and took out the notebook that had followed him through the years. Most of the pages were soft now, the ink faded. He read the first entry again, the one written the morning after she vanished. Sound like breathing near the rails, then gone. It felt like a message from another life. The sheriff had died a year earlier, never seeing the case reopen. The department had new faces, new uniforms, new rules, but none of it changed what had happened. The file was closed again, this time marked solved, yet Vance knew that word did not fit. Solved meant peace, and there was no peace here. Only gravity pulling memories back to the surface when no one was looking. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. He looked down at the water, still dark, still moving. "You can rest now," he said quietly, not sure who he was speaking to. Maybe Helen, maybe himself. He stayed there until the sky turned black. Then he stood, tore the last page from his notebook, and let it fall into the current. The paper drifted for a moment before sinking, vanishing into the slow, endless motion below. In the distance, a train crossed the valley, its whistle long and hollow. The sound rolled over the hills, fading until it became something softer, something almost human, like a voice whispering from far away, reminding him that truth never really ends. It just changes shape. The next morning, Vance handed in his badge. He left the station without ceremony, the notebook gone, the drawer empty, the desk bare. No one stopped him. By noon, his car disappeared down the old highway toward the mountains. The file of Helen Cross stayed behind, tucked into the second drawer of a metal cabinet, where it would sleep under dust and light for years to come. But the river kept moving, the water carving its way through the valley as it always had, and every spring when the thaw came, the current whispered the same name over and over again until the town learned, finally, to listen. Years passed. Silver Junction grew smaller, quieter, almost forgotten. The freight yard shut down, the rails taken up and sold for scrap. The telegraph office became a storage room, the bridge repainted and renamed after a local councilman no one remembered. The new generation drove past without knowing what had once happened there. But the river remembered. It always did. In the spring of 2012, a storm tore through the valley. Heavy rain flooded the old rail line, carving out the mud that had covered the foundations for decades. When the water pulled back, it left behind something small and shining, a locket, the same one Helen Cross used to wear. Inside was a photograph of her mother, still visible through the rust and dirt. The state lab matched the fingerprint inside to Russell Thorne. The case file was reopened, just long enough for an official statement. But the man was already gone. He had died 2 years earlier in a nursing home, his last words recorded by no one. Still, the finding made headlines. Cold case solved after nearly 50 years. The town nodded, then returned to silence. Samuel Vance never saw the reports. He had moved north, retired quietly near the Montana border. He lived alone in a small cabin surrounded by pine trees and wind. He never remarried. Some nights he would sit by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass, and hear the faint whistle of a train that no longer existed. He kept only one box from his years in Silver Junction. Inside were the case notes, the photographs, the letter that had started it all. Every few months he opened it, read through the pages, and folded them back again. He knew the story was finished, but endings, he had learned, were just another kind of waiting. One evening, in late summer, a local reporter came to his door. She was young, eager, carrying a recorder and a notebook. She asked if he was the man who had solved the Helen Cross case. Vance smiled faintly. "No one solved it," he said. "The river did." She looked confused, thanked him, and left. After she was gone, he walked outside and sat on the steps. The air was cool, the sky deep blue fading into gray. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, low and steady. He closed his eyes and heard the sound of the rails again, the metallic rhythm that had haunted him for years. He could almost see her standing there, lantern in hand, calm and certain, waiting for the train that never came. He whispered her name once, soft enough for the wind to carry it. Then he stood, went inside, and closed the door. The next morning, the neighbor found the cabin quiet, the chair still by the window, the box open on the table. Inside, the last page of his notebook lay folded neatly. The words were written in small, careful script. Truth travels slow, but it never stops. Outside, the river moved steady through the valley, carrying light across its surface like a memory refusing to fade. And when the wind passed through the reeds, it sounded almost like a voice calling from far away, gentle and steady, saying her name again and again, Helen Cross. Some stories end when the truth is found. Others keep moving, like rivers that never stop, carrying everything they touch a little further downstream. The case of Helen Cross began with a single light burning by the tracks, and ended with a name whispered by the wind almost 50 years later. In the end, it was not luck or science or even justice that uncovered what happened. It was persistence. It was a deputy who refused to let silence win. It was time itself, peeling back the layers that people built to protect what they did not want to see. Every town has a place like Silver Junction, a bridge, a field, a road where someone vanished and everyone chose to forget. But the truth never forgets. It waits, sometimes for years, sometimes for lifetimes. So, if you are still here, still listening, remember this. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sounds like the wind through old rails, calling the name of someone who should never have been forgotten. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit subscribe, leave a comment below, and tell us what you think really happened that night by the tracks. Because silence protects no one. And this was The Girl Who Waited by the Tracks.